So Simon, when did you first become interested in aviation?
Hi Mike, yep, probably the most random answer you'll get in this show, but when I was younger we had a family friend over the road, and I went over to see her one day to carry out a little errand. I was about 4 and I knocked on the door and a man answered the door and he only had one eye. There was a big hole and I ran away screaming as you would do.
Yes.
And about an hour later our family friend turned up with a couple of model kits. It turned out that the guy who answered the door was a friend of hers, a Kiwi soldier from the war, and his party trick whenever strangers came to the door was to take his glass eye out. So obviously that completely terrified me. And I remember he bought me a Spitfire Mark 9 and a Focke-Wulf 190. So
wow.
yeah, my little geeky aviation career started at that date as well. Yeah.
Very cool story. That's certainly one of the weirdest we've had. So.
I did think it was weird, yeah.
Never expected that, but yeah. So yeah, what year did you join the RAF?
It was 1996 I joined up. I did a slightly longer course through officer training, so the RAF decided that I'd benefit from a couple of extra months, which actually benefited me in the long run. So so I ended up getting a prize at the end of my officer training course, which was great. I was full of myself. It was the Group Captain Williams Memorial Prize for the most improved cadet, or as my mates called it, the fuckwit prize. And they said, once you're a fuckwit, now you're not so much of a fuckwit. So, yeah. But anyway, it got me my choice of hold after, which was great. So there was a whole host of choices you could do, and one of those was Cyprus, where I went and spent 3 months before I started flying training. So yeah, that was really good in 1997.
So did you have a type that you wanted to go on to, or did you always want to go into helicopters?
Well, I think everybody in those days, certainly, they joined up to be a single-seat fighter pilot. And I think, when I went through, I didn't even know anything about helicopters. I thought you'd either be a Jaguar or a Harrier pilot, or if maybe you messed up at some stage, you're going to fly Hercules. That's no offence to Hercules pilots. I've got plenty of friends who have brilliant careers. I never even knew anything about helicopters. So when I went out to Cyprus and held there, it was a Wessex squadron at the time, and they flew over a single pilot Wessex. I mean, I'd never flown in my life, and pretty much every time they went flying, they'd give you a slot. So I started flying helicopters through them. Absolutely loved it, and also through officer training. I ended up being taken flying with the Army Air Corps in a Gazelle, which is just a brilliant little aircraft. It's like a goldfish bowl, and we went ever at 150 knots and what felt like about 3 feet above the ground, chasing deer all over Scotland. And so after that I came back, started my first flying course and finished that, did okay through that. And they said, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to be a helicopter pilot. And they said, well, you've got to put down jets. So I went, okay, yeah, that's cool as well. So I put jets down, and they sent me to fly helicopters. So it all kind of worked out in the end. Brilliant.
So let's talk about some of the aircraft you started training on.
Yeah. So the Firefly T-67 was the first one I started flying. They changed this system just after I went through. So you used to go and fly Tucano, and that's being a real sort of history geek. I only ever wanted to fly the Spitfire, and the Tucano was the closest you would ever get to a Spitfire without being a Spitfire. Unfortunately, they changed it, so when I got to the end of my flying training, they streamed you to helicopters, multis or jets, and obviously I got sent helicopters, so I missed out that stage. And then went to Shawbury to fly the Squirrel, which is a lovely little aircraft, a bit like the Gazelle. Yeah. I did about 70 hours on there. I was sent solo by a chap called John Garnons-Williams, and real strange fact, but the aircraft he sent me solo in 10 years later was the aircraft that he was killed by. Actually collided with him 2007, the same place as well. So wow. I was just looking through my logbook the other day, and I realised that, and it was absolutely horrific, So really makes you think. He was a lovely chap as well. Yeah. But from there I went to fly the Griffin, where I subsequently became an instructor later in life. And then got my wings in 1999. Mm-hmm. So it was damn hard work. I don't think I was the most natural pilot, but somehow I managed to bluff my instructors and got my wings in February 99.
So what kind of flying would you be conducting during this training, or in the initial phase of your training?
Okay, through Shawbury, it's kind of like a standard routine you follow, where you convert onto the aircraft for a helicopter. It's very much starts with the hovering. So on the Squirrel, I mean, never, I'd had a few freebie flights in the Wessex, as I said earlier, but they start by giving you one control at a time. They don't want to max you out. So you might start with the cyclic, and they had a a huge grass airfield at Chetwynd, and you literally be in the middle of that. You'd be all over the place, up, down, left and right. And eventually they work out, and they give you the collective as well, and then finally the pedals. The problem with helicopters is the controls have primary and secondary effects. So often you do one thing and actually there's something else happens completely randomly, or what feels like completely randomly. So yeah, you start with learning to fly that helicopter, progressing onto circuit work. I mean, flying a circuit is, kind of encompasses a lot of the disciplines that you need to fly in general. So it's quite a demanding thing to do when you're new. Then onto things like confined areas, onto the Griffin itself. One of the biggest challenges was learning to fly with a crew. So, up to that date, you'd only ever flown single pilot effectively. You're the only person in the aircraft. The instructor generally would, they would let you dig yourself a big hole. That's that kind of instructional technique, is they'd let you get yourself into trouble, and just before you're about to get in a lot more trouble, they'd kind of pull you out of it and tell you off. But with the Griffin, you had a crewman in the back, so you had another voice going on in your headphones. You had air traffic radios, your instructor nagging you on the left, and then a crewman instructor and a crewman talking as well. So that it kind of sapped your capacity when you first started flying a bigger aircraft like that. But again, it followed the same sort of routine with circuit work and then confined areas, etc. What was different on the Griffin? We started doing search and rescue flying as well. I didn't find it very easy. I never. One of the things with helicopters you have to do is what's called the dunker. It's underwater escape training, a bit like in I can't remember which Tom Cruise film it is, but it shows them going into the swimming pool.
Awful.
It is bloody awful. Yeah, if you ever ask, most pilots and crewmen will say it's fine. I hated it. Absolutely terrified me. So that was a part of the new training you had to do when you went through the more applied stage. So search and rescue training was. It's like a basic introduction, about 25 hours, mountain flying, winching over decks, over the sea, which is what I didn't enjoy, but the mountain flying was amazing. And then from there we did the more applied tactical flying, which is really what I enjoyed more than anything. Going off in formations, 4 helicopters, flying around the country at low level, and time and targets and troop inserts, and that's really when I decided that I wanted to go to fly trooping helicopter, battlefield helicopters rather than the search and rescue side.
So how many hours or how many years did it take before you got posted to your frontline aircraft?
It was almost 3.5 years, and I did quite well in terms of timing because they missed out the Tucano stage. So I got there relatively quickly. There was a girl on my Shawbury course who she'd gone through the old system, and she was actually a trained doctor, so she joined at, I think it was 26 or something, fully qualified doctor, and she went all the way through fast jet training, and she got chopped, I think, on her very last flight. I mean, she was horrifically talented and wasted on helicopters, but she was mid-30s at this stage. I think she was 34, so she ended up leaving. She said, it'll be 40 by the time I finish my first tour. So yeah, it's incredible, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. So Simon, your first frontline aircraft was a Puma. Tell us your first thoughts on the aircraft.
Yeah, I loved it. It's as you can see from the one behind me, it's not quite the same condition as the ones I used to fly, but it's certain angles it looks dumpy and ugly as hell, but actually from sort of other angles it's beautiful, and it was a real pilot's aircraft. It was like a little sports car, so I absolutely loved flying it. It was great fun to fly.
Yeah. So what was the role of the Puma at the time you were flying it?
Well, there was 2 frontline squadrons. There was 3, 230, 72 in Northern Ireland and 33 in the UK, and it was essentially battlefield helicopters, so flying troops, special forces support, underslung loads. I mean, just pretty much everything in support of the army. You're a force multiplier. You're sort of increasing the boots on the ground.
Yeah. So what was the general crew loadout?
It was generally 3 crew, so it was a twin pilot and 1 crewman in the back. It did used to be a single pilot, which was one of the attractions for the Puma force, was you got to fly just 1 pilot, and then the crewman would come forward and jump in the left, but that changed just before I got there. But we did fly a lot of the time with navigators as well. Okay. If you ask any Puma pilot if he wants to fly with a pilot or a navigator, he'll always say the navigator, because you got to do the flying and the navigator got to do all the hard work, the radios and navigation.
So let's talk about your ground training, and can you just talk us through what you had to go through before you started flying the aircraft?
Yeah, it's just a standard RAF ground school. I think it was sort of 6 weeks or so at RAF Benson. and it just followed the standard routine of talking you through all the you know, the systems on the aircraft, and you know, a big exam at the end. But it was a classic learn and dump. You know, you suck it all in, and then, you know, day one you spat out the other end, desperately trying to remember everything as you start to fly it. So yeah, it must have been a bad memory because I can't remember much of that.
So let's talk about your first flight. Can you remember that?
No, I can't be entirely honest. I know I did look at my logbook before this to try and fit it, but no, it's I mean, I can tell you what it will have been like, because they're all pretty much the same, and that is a complete you know, massive confusion trying to follow what was going on. The Puma is a wonderfully simple aircraft, but like anything, it does take you a little while to get used to a new aircraft.
So what squadron were you based with for your training?
Yeah, you're attached to 33 Squadron. It was a flight of 33 Squadron with dedicated instructors. Carried out, you know, it's a much more intense course than the ones you'd done through training. It was the first time I'd flown with military instructors as well, and it was really different flying with exclusively military instructors as opposed to a mix of military and civilians. So they took no prisoners, it's fair to say, and I don't think I've worked as hard before or since getting through that course by the skin of my teeth. It was it was damn hard work.
Were you expecting to be like that though?
No.
Right.
No, I wasn't. It all felt, even if I can draw a line, it all felt quite gradual, and then you got to the conversion flight and suddenly it was you know, it was like a precipice. You were hanging on with your fingertips. I think what it was, you know, your previous courses, they're stepped, whereas going through the OCF, everything was more compressed because you're a qualified service pilot. You know, you had your wings on your chest, and they expect you to be able to fly without them telling you. But and also while you're doing the course and you're learning the aircraft, you know, you're planning and organising overseas trainers. So for us, we did a tour all around Europe, and we're also organising the operational phase, which has taken the aircraft away for, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks, to north of England, trooping, flying through electronic warfare ranges. So this is all going on while you're desperately trying to learn how to fly the aircraft and remember the checks. So I didn't have much capacity.
So let's talk about the flying training. What would it be like?
Yeah, so it was tough. It was, as I said, it was quite, if you imagine you did the Shawbury course in probably about 10 hours to start with, and then we moved on to things like procedural instrument flying, you know, flying through airways, etc. Then we moved on to the Oasis Trainer, which was fantastic fun. So that was taking 4 aircraft around Europe. That was in the days before the Euro. So you know, on day one you'd be given all your various currencies. I didn't realise we were doing 2 nights in France, so I spent all my French euros on the francs on the first night. You know, day 4 I realised I didn't have any French francs left, and I couldn't get any, which was a bit embarrassing. But it was a wonderful trip. Basically a sort of anti-clockwise route around Europe. Included, I think I sent you one of the photos, flying over the Mona Dam at 50 feet, which was just incredible. You know, exactly how...
You must have to pinch yourself.
Yeah. I mean, it makes you think. I think the dam buses did it 60 foot at night, so, you know, it was scary enough 50 foot by day, so yeah, so it's fabulous fun.
So let's talk about how the Puma handled and what were its strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah, it was a very basic aircraft. You know, a lot of the other helicopters, and particularly the modern helicopters which are flying now, have got wonderful autopilots. You know, Sherlock Holmes, he says you can always identify an airline pilot by the size of his index finger because it's ginormous, because he spends his whole time pressing buttons. Whereas an old aircraft like this, there's not many buttons to press. It's, you know, it's mainly manual flying, and, you know, looking at my logbooks, sort of 5-6 hour flights with a navigator, you know, that was all hand flying. The autopilot in the Puma was really basic and very limited. It gave you a bit of stability control and a basic height keeping, but it was all hand flying. So the strengths of it was a very, very nice helicopter to fly. There were a couple of foibles with the Puma. One of those was yaw roll divergence, which is it's got a big strong tail rotor on the back, and if you let it get out of balance, so yaw, the rudders, and you try to boot it back in, you know, typical pilot fashion, a big boot of rudder, it actually could induce a strong roll, and they showed it in training, and effectively it's like the helicopter almost turning over, so that's quite interesting. But the main foible with the Puma is its lack of anticipators. So most helicopters, you know, the power lever is a collective. So, you know, the handbrakey type thing that your pilot generally has in the left arm. So if you imagine, you know, you demand power from the engines. Sometimes, you know, you're pumping the lever like you're trying to inflate a tyre. But if you pull it in rapidly, in most helicopters, you have these things called anticipators, which they can see you rapidly want a load of power and they spool up the engines. In the Puma, it didn't have that. So what could happen is if you try to pull in the lever very quickly to get power, say you're just coming to the end of what's called a quick stop, the engines would take a long time to spool up. Reputedly, I don't know if this is true or not, so don't quote me on it, the engines, Turbo 3C4s, were used to dry grain in France. So, yeah, it's probably just an apocryphal story, but I don't know if it's true or not. But it could kill you. So in the training, the pilot who wasn't flying, he would always look at the NG gauges, which is the gas generator gauges, and below, I think it's 75%. They would call engines below, and then engines above. So when they were above, the aircraft would fly very well, and the engines would respond. But below it, it'd take a second or two for the engines to kick in, and it nearly caught me out in Northern Ireland once. I came very close to crashing. Totally my own fault. I'll tell you. So, yeah, it does happen.
Yeah. So did you work with the Army and Navy closely?
Yeah. So you go through flying training, all the way through flying training, apart from the conversion, was with mixed Army and Navy, and then actually going to the front line, Northern Ireland, with the Army and with the Navy. We used to have 3 sets of rules at the time. The RAF could do this, the Navy could do that, and generally it was the RAF that was a little bit more limiting, for various reasons, but that all, with the Joint Helicopter Command, it was all smashed together and we all had the same rules, so that was good. But no, they're, great bunch of guys and girls,
Was there much banter between
horrific banter. So I remember a Battle of Britain dining in night at RAF Aldergrove, and there was an RAF fly past to that, of course, and the lead RAF Puma underneath had Fly Navy in black gaffer tape, which obviously nobody had spotted before they did it. So.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, it's all in good humour most of the time anyway.
So did you ever fly the Puma in live theatres?
Yeah, technically Aldergrove was a live theatre, so my first tour was Northern Ireland. We flew fully armed, so as aircrew we flew with a rifle, SA-80, and a pistol, and there were crewmen in the back had a general purpose machine gun as well. So, and in fact we had infrared jammer on the aircraft as well, because there was a surface to air missile threat in Northern Ireland. The IRA had SA-7 man pads, which is it was definitely a live theatre.
Simon, can you share any memorable stories you might have had in the Puma?
Yeah, a few. It's quite an interesting tour, 3 years. I think I mentioned earlier about the lack of anticipators on the Puma, and it really nearly caught me out once. In fact, it did catch me out. I was saved by the guys flying with, but I was going on holiday that afternoon, so all I could think about was getting on the plane, going off on my nice holiday, and we had one final pickup of troops somewhere south of Armagh in Northern Ireland. And we couldn't see them. We were flying along sort of flat out 50 feet, and I suddenly saw them just go underneath the helicopter. So I told the crew, and I did the punchy helicopter pilot superhero type thing. I just wrapped it on its side, pulled around as fast as I could, which slows it down. And as I said earlier, I think with the anticipator, the engines wind down because the rotors speed up. And we rolled out into wind, and I was flaring the aircraft, desperately trying to slow it down. And engines are still down at this stage. And then we kind of run out of translational lift at this stage, and I yank in an armful of lever to arrest the rate of descent of the helicopter. And obviously the engines are still spooled down, so what happened was the aircraft just fell out of the sky. Ooh. And we were over a really sloping field. There was large rocks, and I just completely froze at this stage. I just didn't know what to do because the aircraft isn't flying, it's just sinking. The guy I was flying with was a chap called Jez, who's a really experienced, respected and liked instructor, and he goes, "It's all right mate, I've got it." And all you could do was just lower the lever a little bit and hold the controls and just wait for the engines to come back in. And yeah, I was basically a passenger at this stage. So I sat there, and I think we basically hit a bit of ground effect at, I don't know, about 5 foot or something like this, but it was horrific. But I'm not sure the troops wanted to get back on the aircraft after that, because they'd seen it come in and then basically fall out of the sky.
Wow.
Yeah, and I suppose the other thing was the vortex ring incident as well. So vortex ring for the layman effectively is when it's a bit like a fixed wing stalling. I've been told by several people that you can't put a Puma into vortex ring, and I'd like to tell them about my experience and say you can. And so they used to give us a demonstration of what's called incipient vortex ring, which is like the early stages of it. The aircraft gets whooshy and wallowy, and because we used to do this surveillance task, which I might cover later. where you were sitting high and very heavy at altitudes when the air's thin, and it's quite easy to get into vortex ring. But essentially, the sort of the time you might get it is when you're descending with low airspeed. Now, the only way we could get the aircraft into vortex ring, we were up at 6,000 feet. There was an instructor flying, and was going backwards. So no negative airspeed, and the RAF used to teach you that below 30 knots and over 500 feet rate of descent, you'd go into vortex ring, and it didn't. We had less than 30 knots. Went through 500 foot rate of descent, and I thought, this isn't happening, nothing's happening here. And then the rate of descent, as it hit 800 feet rate of descent, it suddenly just hit the peg, which was 2,500, I think, and the aircraft, sort of apologies to use the hands, but it was going backwards and down like this, and suddenly it pitched what felt like completely nose down. This was at night as well, by the way. Ooh. And it also rolled 180 degrees, and I just remember looking across at the guy flying it, this chap called Parts, and he looked like he was trying to dig a hole with the controls. He was all over the place. The crewman threw himself on the ground. I just grabbed the armoured seat, and I've never felt like, hopefully never again, a passenger completely out of control in the aircraft. And I remember just thinking, oh, this is it. And we somehow just came out at 1,500 feet, so we lost nearly 5,000 feet of altitude.
Wow.
And after that, they did all the demonstrations of vortex ring in the simulator, which is a really good idea. Oh, I still can't believe they used to do it in the aircraft.
Wow.
And maybe the other thing is the mission I was involved in when I was awarded mentioned dispatchers. So I would caveat as well, it's not false modesty. I read recently a write-up of a para who got mentioned dispatchers for charging a Taliban machine gun nest somewhere in Afghanistan, and that's probably at the top end of an MID, and mine was probably right at the bottom end, but it was still it was an interesting day out. So there was me and a chap called Dave was the other pilot, and Trevor the crewman, all first tourists, and we were sent to Bestbrook, which was the main base for helicopter operations in South Armagh. And we were told that the second day we were there was going to be a big demonstration by it was the South Armagh Farmers and Residents Association, who were a lovely group of chaps and chapesses. There were, I think, about 200 of them, and they were going to protest against the British occupation of Northern Ireland. So at the time there were various patrol bases in South Armagh, and then there were some smaller golf towers, as we called them, like Golf 10, 20, 30, and 40, and they were basically surveillance bases, big towers, but they didn't have many people in them. They'd have a little bit of barbed wire around them. And essentially they turned up en masse at one of these, and you can imagine whatever it was, 10 troops there and 200 people trying to get into, do nasty things to them. It was all getting very serious. So we took the decision as a crew to drastically overload our aircraft. So we at the time we had a max weight of 7,000 kilograms, and operationally you could go to 7,400. We were flying with the RUC HMSU, which is the heavy riot police. So they're absolutely massive guys and girls. Some of the girls were, they'd make good prop forwards also. But they had all the full riot gear as well. And we took the decision just to fill up the aircraft with as many people as we could. The crewmen estimated we were kind of near 8,000 kgs when we left. So we're pretty much a ton over our max weight. But the reason we did that is because we knew that every person was going to count. So when we got the call that the rioters were there, we departed as soon as we could, and we went to the first patrol base. There was the landing pad was right next to the wire, and as soon as we landed there was sort of bricks, petrol bombs, crossbow bolts, absolutely everything landing in front of you. And the wire was, 15 feet maybe in front of where we landed. So these guys are, this whole row of people are there, and they're throwing everything at the helicopter, bricks bouncing off the windscreen. But then the interesting bit is seeing the riot troops just literally falling out the side of the aircraft. They'd actually been lying on top of each other in the back. So our crewman was actually lying. He was touching the top of the cabin roof because he was on top of so many people. But they literally fell out the side of the aircraft, ran forward, and they were cracking skulls with their truncheons and stuff to stop them. So we did that for getting on for 3 hours 40 of, one of my friends very kindly put it, he said, blatantly breaking the Puma release to service, which is a document that tells you that you can't fly over a certain weight, etc. But the rioters went from patrol base to patrol base, and we would empty the troops from one patrol base, take them to another, fill them up, they'd deal with the riot, and then they'd all go somewhere else, and we get the call to go there. We ended up going into a place called Crossmaglen, which was is the only town in the UK, as far as I'm aware, that has a monument to an IRA terrorist in the main square. You used to see it when you came into land, so you see the guy with his fist raised in the air, which is interesting. But we'd emptied that base. It was a big base. I think there was like 6 troops in there, and we were told that they'd turned up at Crossmaglen, so we all steamed in there again, full up of troops. And the fencing was on fire, and they'd actually started where we landed. Again, it's sort of maybe 10 foot from the fence, and then it was like some kind of scene out of a zombie movie. They'd actually started pulling. I remember seeing these hands go through the plating, and they're pulling the plating apart to try and get into us. And I'd say, while they're doing that, there's petrol bombs landing next to us, and these guys going out again and cracking the hands. It was just incredible.
How did you personally feel being in that situation? Were you scared, or did you just get on with the job?
It was just a massive high.
Yeah.
So
right.
And it was that was, I know, 3 hours 40 of just constantly in and out of all these bases, and so being bricked, petrol bombed. It was great, and it was the only time in my career where we came back and we all had a beer at the end of the day, and we just thought it was the only time we'd ever made a difference to and actually help people and stop something bad happening. So
you must have all felt good, like you did something.
Yeah, it did.
It
felt really good. Yeah, yeah.
So Simon, how many hours did you get on the Puma?
I think I've got about 1,500 now. So I did my 3 years in Northern Ireland, and then I obviously went on to the Merlin, the Griffin, and then I came back and did my last 3 years on the Puma as well. But I didn't get quite as many hours at the end, so I was mainly doing a trials job.
So Simon, we're in the Puma Cockpit. Can you go through it for us?
Yeah, as you can see, it's a very modern, advanced and complex designed aircraft. But it's missing a few key things. No, it's very simple. You obviously got your primary flying controls and displays here. So your airspeed indicator, attitude indicator. This is your not head-up display. That's your compass. Key one for a helicopter pilot is your radar altimeter there. Obviously, we fly a lot of the time in reference to our height above the ground. This is your undercarriage lever down here, and this would go from green to red. These are your engine controls in the middle, so as you can see there's 2 of everything. That's your key one. Your gas generator, so as I said earlier, below 75% is when the engines are really slow to respond. Your central warning panel, there really was very little on there. There's only a few warnings that it could give you. At the top, if you did lose an engine, you get your throttles here. These would be fully forward like this, normally in flight, and you could bring them back to idle. These are your fuel shutoffs, which you would, if you need to shut down the engine in a hurry, tail rotor's gone, for example, you'd cut that. This is your rotor brake as well, and then on the top, various controls. These are often in different positions on different aircraft as well, which is really confusing when you're learning to fly and learning the checks. The big hole down here is where the coffee machine goes. So 252, which is your GPS navigation, etc. And these are your intercom boxes as well, basic. And this is your have quick radio here as well, so it's frequency agile hopping, so secure, but it was an absolute pain in the neck to set up. And your parking brake. Obviously this is your collective lever as well, so it controls your power, and you can see you've got your flare release and chaff release on there as well. Basic autopilot, so it says Barrow, it's got a height hold function. I can tell you almost never flicked that button because it was bloody rubbish. And your temperature gauge, funny old thing in Northern Ireland, it didn't go that high. And then your fuel gauges. One of the limitations of the Puma was it couldn't carry much fuel, so you only ever had about 1,000 kilograms of fuel, which is about enough for an hour and a half. It used to run out extremely quickly. When in Northern Ireland, we used to carry the bomb disposal wagons. They weighed, I think, about 2,000 kilograms. It used to give us about 20 minutes worth of fuel, so that's not a lot of time to get it, underslung it, and then take it somewhere, and then fly back to the refuel slot. So often you would see the low level lights come on, so your minimum you could fly with is 50 kgs, and you see these come on at 70. And yeah, any Puma pilot will know you often landed with almost no fuel, but that was all part of the fun. And your little transfer gauge as well, transfer pump. Very, very expensive clock. So Puma, it looks a bit rubbish, but it's bloody brilliant fun to fly. It was a real pilot's aircraft. As I said, the autopilot's rubbish, it's all hands-on. So all the flying we did was hands-on, it was fun. One of the really good things about the Puma, just about every helicopter in the world has got something called a torque gauge. You won't find a torque gauge on a Puma. you will find in fact I think, let's see if I can find it. Oh, there we go, collective pitch gauge. This is what we flew with reference to. So an aircraft like the Merlin, you could break it if you say you had a high power setting and you rolled heavily to the, I think it was the advancing blade. You could overtorque the aircraft, which is overstressing various bits and bobs. The engineers would get really grumpy with you. It'd cost you several crates of beer. Whereas the Puma, it used a collective pitch gauge. Typically we'd set 14¼ degrees when we're flying, and you would leave it there, and you could do whatever you wanted with the aircraft. No matter the weight of the aircraft. So it was fun. It was basically flown like a fixed wing. So we'd set the cruise pitch, and then just fly it on the cyclic. So that was the kind of key. That was what made the Puma fun, really, and the key difference between it and other aircraft. So it's a bit old. It's a bit simple, but it's really good fun. A bit like me. Welcome to the cabin of a Puma. I do apologise to any crewmen watching because this is their empire, as the pilots who weren't allowed in here at all. Generally in Northern Ireland we'd have a GPMG on the right hand side of the aircraft, sitting just here. Generally the aircraft was in 12-seat fit. You can see at the moment it's only got 4 seats. We'd have another set of 2 here and 2 at the front. It could go up to 16 as well, but obviously at that stage you couldn't use, this is the hatch for the hook, so normally there'd be a hook hanging from the bottom of the, I think it's on the bottom of the gearbox, and you'd have an underslung load underneath. We often flew with underslung loads in Northern Ireland. All sorts of things like fuel containers, taking them to remote patrol bases. I think the worst load I flew, apart from a Gazelle, was a sack of crisps because it didn't fly very well. We could only fly at about 20 knots because the net would get blown back up. It was absolutely rubbish. But generally speaking, there were heavy loads that we carried underneath us, and they would hang from here. The crewman would go down through this hatch and check the load was all correct. Not all of the crewmen could fit through here. There's one particularly large chap didn't. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Basic. It's a truck effectively. It's an airborne truck. As you can see, there's a lot of things missing in here from the operational aircraft.